Hello viewers, welcome back to SEF News with me as your news anchor, Ariane Gilbert. And today's news is about: did the US miss a chance to stop North Korea's nuclear program? Pyongyang International is one of the world's quieter airports. The country's chronic isolation means that there are not many places to fly, and few foreigners keep on visiting. At least until a new terminal was built in 2012, many of the flights on the departure boards were just for show, giving the appearance connection with the outside world. They never actually took off. Against this melancholy backdrop, one day in late May 1999, something quite extraordinary happened. An official plane bearing the blue and white livery of the US government and emblazoned with stars and stripes landed and taxied along the runway. The plane was carrying a former Defense Secretary, William Perry, who had been brought back from retirement by President Bill Clinton to try to end the frozen conflict between the US and North Korea. With a small group of ideas, Perry was embarking on a mission that he hoped would avert a return to the armed standoff that had brought the two countries to the brink of war 5 years earlier. The flight path followed by Perry's plane, which had taken off in Japan, had not been used since the Korean War. As it approached North Korean territory, Perry and his aides cracked dark jokes about whether anyone had remembered to tell the vigilant air defense missile crews a few thousand feet below that they had an official invitation. Perry was arriving at a moment of high tension. The previous year, the regiment in Pyongyang had shown off its proficiency in missile technology with a series of tests, including the launch of long-range Taipodong-1, which sails over Japan before splashing into the Pacific. Officially, the Taipodong-1 was intended to launch a satellite, but it relied on the same technology and rocket power as an intercontinental ballistic missile, and the only way such a missile is of a real military use is when it has a nuclear warhead in its nose cone. By the time the US delegation arrived in Pyongyang, a 1999 agreement between Washington and Pyongyang intended to prevent North Korea from ever becoming a nuclear weapons state was right. Both sides were failing to deliver on their earlier promises as part of the deal known as Agreed Framework. And the US had undertaken to supply 500 tons of fuel oil a year to the famine-ridden state, but the shipment had begun to arrive late as the Republican-controlled Congress tried to block every fuel purchase. Meanwhile, the American, Japanese, and South Korean were behind schedule on their agreement to develop light water reactors for civilian energy generation inside North Korea. For their part, the North Koreans appeared to be involved in furtive activities which, along with the missile launch, convinced us intelligence agencies that they are seeking to continue making missile material for a bomb. Perry was carrying a letter from Bill Clinton to the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, who had been inherited power in 1994 after the death of his father, Kim Il-sung, the founder of the nation. Along with Clinton's letter to Kim expressing hope for better relations, Perry carried an explicit mandate from Japanese and South Korean leaders, authorizing him to speak on their behalf and outline a peace plan in return for both renunciation of nuclear weapons and long-range missiles. North Korea get more than oil reactors it would get, a ticket to back into the international community, including diplomatic ties and trade with US. And potatoes in run-up to the Perry mission, North Koreans officially had signed that Kim Jong-il was convinced that potatoes were the way of famine in return for allowing US weapons inspector to visit suspicious underground site. Shortly before Perry's visit, Pyongyang had initially demanded $3,000 million, but eventually settled for 100,000 tons of potatoes. At airport, there were Mercedes salons on tarmac, and protocols officer waiting to drive Perry's delegation to government guest house through Grand, the deserted boulevard. And then, in a quote, They were traffic police, but no traffic. End of quote. Perry recalled when we met recently in a hotel close to his former workplace, the Pentagon. After being driven through the tiny streets of Capitol, Perry's training to be complimentary told his house how impressed as he was by the modernity of architecture, only to be reminded that US Air Force has obliterated the original city. By this stage of his life, Perry could reasonably claim to know the risks of failure in nuclear diplomacy. As a defense contractor in the 1960s, he had spent the Cuban Missile Crisis scrutinizing aerial photos and intelligence reports, thinking his day at work would be his last. And that is all the news for today, and thank you. See you next time.